I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to Leadovation. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. This podcast is dedicated to the art and science of innovative leadership. Through insightful interviews with industry experts, I bring you cutting-edge strategies and experiences of innovative leadership, helping you think differently, act strategically, and achieve remarkable results. Join me as I provide insights and tools that empower you to make smarter decisions, forge meaningful relationships. Welcome to Leadovation. What if the people best suited to lead are being overlooked, while others rise to power for the wrong reasons? In this conversation with Michael Wenderoth, we dig into that provocative idea and explore what it really takes to advance in leadership today. Michael shares how his career as an executive coach was sparked by watching talented, values-driven leaders get sidelined while less qualified but politically savvy colleagues climb the ladder. We cover the essential but often misunderstood skills of influence, networking, and political agility, reframing them as tools for good rather than slimy tactics. Michael also breaks down his three-part framework he calls the rock, the map, and the snowball for building power ethically and effectively. Along the way, we talk about authenticity and vulnerability and trust and how those concepts can either strengthen or derail leaders if misunderstood. We also look ahead at the future of leadership in an AI-driven world where balancing human connection and technological tools will be essential. Michael Wenderoth is an executive coach, author, and host of the 97% Effective podcast, where he explores the hard truths about what really drives careers forward. If you want to understand not just how to work harder, but how to work smarter by building influence and impact without losing your integrity, well, you won't want to miss this episode. This is the Leadovation podcast. I'm Dean Newland. Let's dive in. Well, Michael, it's really a delight to have you on this show. And I didn't realize until just recently that you said that you were actually in Spain right now. So that's awesome. I mean, congratulations for you for finding a way to have your business so international and go anywhere, be anything. I think that's great. We talked before that you had this interesting comment that I wanted to start us off with, that the good people that should be in leadership are being passed over, which I thought was a relatively provocative statement. Like, we've got people right now, in a sense, what you're saying, got their way into the C-suite that probably shouldn't have, and we are living the benefit or the problem thereof, and that there are a lot of people out there that should be in these positions of leadership and that are not. Could you explain that point of view?
Yeah, and I would start this with a quick story, which is
Please.
Many years back, and this brought me into coaching. I got a call from, not his real name, my close friend Matt. This was about 15 years into our career. And Matt is this type of individual, right, that you profile on this show. Self-effacing, smart, hardworking, team player. These are the qualities that we know in leadership lead organizations to success for everyone, right? They're inclusive, they trust, they bring everyone together. But Matt called, I thought this was a celebratory, right? He got, the name CEO. Called up, he got ousted. And he said, politics, power play. I was doing all these things that I was told to do in training and leadership literature, these things that we just talked about. And instead, he finds himself sidelined or derailed. And that made me totally furious because I started to see that kind of pattern with a lot of individuals, right, across those that I had worked with or worked for. And essentially, we see some of these other individuals who may be a little unsavory, big talkers, heavily networked, rising to the top. So the fundamental question is, what were good people missing or getting wrong? Or were we training them incorrectly? right? There's a lot of leadership training out there. And make a long story short was, when you go and look at the research as to why people rise, build power, a lot of times they're effective. There is a lot of evidence, right, that they are heavily networked. They're really crisp communicators. They have strong influence and political skills. And so those things are neutral, right? They are just strategies, forces you can use. They can be used towards nefarious ends or means. They can also be used to create good. But I found a lot of the kind of good people were like, I don't want to network. That's like unfair. I don't want to talk about myself, right? That's boasting. And politics, that's backstabbing. Now, those are very negative ways of seeing it. But
so you say you've got some people out there that are suited for great leadership, but they don't have the skill, desire to do this networking, to quote unquote sort of play the game of sort of knowing who the power brokers are to be able to get your way through, even though that they're coming at this with good intentions and they would be excellent in the position. Is it more about that's why we have people who are in these positions of power, because they're good at networking, not so much that they're good at being a leader?
Well, I think networking and having a strong network, is part of being a good leader. Again, you can look at these skills. It's not to say networking necessarily is the only skill you need, and I lay these out in the book, right? Influence, networking. Those are skills that you do need, particularly when you get higher in an organization. When we're lower as an individual contributor, right, our work. But as you move up, your work is through other people. So navigating them, and particularly in an organizational context, right? There's scarce resources. People sit in different positions. There is diversity of opinions. So politics is going to be the mechanism by which disputes get resolved. And it's not voting, right? There will be people who have more power or more influence, and that's the way things will get done.
So my question is, Michael, is this you're going back to your first statement that we have good people who can't get into positions of leadership, and we have people in positions of leadership that maybe shouldn't be, in a sense. I'm sort of like summarizing what you said.
Sure.
Is it the people's issue, or is it the system that we keep reinvesting in? I mean, is it the paradigm of leadership, or is it the individual? And I understand individuals make up the whole, right? It's a micro macro comparison, but what should we be doing? I guess I'm trying to get my arms around this interesting comment is, what does an individual do to be able to get themselves into a position of leadership, assuming that's what they want, that's their calling and so forth, and that they're the right people to do it, they have the right intentions, without the slimy politics that seem to become an issue for that leadership? Again, can help me out here.
Yeah. And so this is exactly what my book is about, right? Because influence is so important, yet we attach these very negative associations with it. So it doesn't mean being slimy, but it does mean understanding, right? You need some of those skills. Your good ideas are not just going to speak for themselves. You need to build coalitions. You need to build trust with certain individuals. You need to build allies or sponsors that will help you. And so all of those skills that I talked about can be done in a very ethical way, but a lot of good people hold back from doing them because of the negative associations.
And what is the negative association? Is it is in their own minds, like, I don't want to be a boaster. You know, I hate speaking about myself, or I hate having to have a elevator speech because it just doesn't feel like me. Are we talking about that? If the individual just doesn't have that skill set, that comfort level, or is it more having to do with there's something unethical about those skills that we have sort of taken something good and turned it into something a little not so good?
It's both those things, right? We have the negative associations with it, and some people may feel that they're unethical, right? Influence, where does that cross over into manipulation?
Right.
But we can reframe those things. I think an easy way to think about it also, Dean, is just think about power and influence like fire. So fire is nothing more than a force. And you can use that to burn the whole place down. But you could also use that to feed the entire village, illuminate the entire city. And so getting people to reframe the relationship and think about that as some of the dimensions, skills, behaviors, strategies that they need to be effective, getting things done, or if it's in their case, seeking to get promoted or rise in organizations. Now, I would say this, to your point, we can talk more about it. There is the individual kind of coming to that realization. I think there are things that organizations can do as well to make sure we get certain individuals, right? Good, we're going to kind of use that word for simplicity here. And I think also if you get good people going up, they create the organization and the culture and what's promoted in line with some of those very strong things, which we know. Strong trust. Safe
This
spaces,
is why we,
right?
I suppose this is why we have so many hundreds of thousands of books on this topic around quote unquote leadership. Because I'm also thinking like we're sort of talking like what makes a good leader, what are the characteristics? You could talk about level 5 leadership. I think it's Jim Collins in Good to Great. He talks about that. This is a quiet individual who's not boasting, but finds a way to be very, very effective. All of a sudden they're leading not only a business, but maybe an industry, right? But in a quiet sort of non-braggadocious way. So we see evidence of that. People write about that. But I guess I'm curious as to the idea that when you finally sort of look at this, are we designing this model that you and I are talking about in order to get good leaders into positions of leadership? Or are we looking at what's needed for the business? And how do we define that? If we really push it out further, now we're going from individual, now we're going, well, what does the company need? Yeah. What does the community need? What does our customers need? And then backfill in terms of what kind of leadership is best to be able to produce that. And that might be, we need somebody who's really good at communication, be able to speak well, be able to influence, be able to be in front of a lot of people because the business, the industry we're in really requires that, right? So sometimes I think we get very centered on what does the individual need, important, versus let's not forget what the business, the community, the customer needs.
Yeah. And I would say to this point, much of leadership is situational. So
agreed.
What is the context? What does the situation call for, right? If you've got an established company and you need to tweak things to keep it growing, you have a startup that needs to scale, or you have a turnaround. There's very good evidence. You want people who come in and boom, will make decisions. And they could be hard decisions, right? Laying off people and switching the strategy.
Right.
And so those are very situational things where we'd be looking for different types of skills in our leaders. But I think overall, what we do see from effective leadership are those who, harness the entire team, the knowledge there.
Well, I do love what you said about situational leadership because I really believe that's important. I use another word, kind of agility. It's ability to see the situation, the context, the people, and be able to flex and morph based on the situation as it is. Still maintaining your authenticity, but removing the static of which your style, your approach, your mindset might be the issue versus something that's helping us move forward. So I love the idea of agility. I'm thinking about, as you're talking here, I'm thinking about an interview that I saw recently. I think it was with Simon Sinek. And I think he was talking to the guy, you probably have seen him. He's really popular right now. The guy out of London who has a podcast called The Diary of a CEO.
Yeah.
Have you seen him yet? Super good. I mean, the guy's got it down, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'll bring up this point. And he said, so the guy, I forget the name of the actor who was in Inglourious Bastards. He played the German, smooth, but very, diabolical character. And he did it brilliantly. I think he got an Academy Award, or he basically got some big accolades for this performance. And it's a dark movie. If you haven't seen Inglourious Bastards, it's Quentin Tarantino. It's rough. It's like, oh God, can we hang on to this and stay through it, right? But he's asked this question. He says, so how did you tap into this part that's so negative, that's so diabolical? There's so much evil in this guy. And the actor says, I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. He goes, no, I mean, like, you know what I mean? The character you played was just, he murdered a lot of people and he was awful and da-da-da-da. How did you tap into that part of yourself? And he said, my character felt that he was doing the right thing.
Hmm.
My character, from his point of view, was doing good. And so it brings into this, I'm not saying I would agree with that, but it's all in the eye of the beholder. Like, we judge other people based on their actions, assuming it's their intention. And we don't even know what the intention is, right? So everybody walks around trying to do their best they can. And everybody else looks at us going like, yeah, but some of this is BS. Some of this, what you're doing is really causing harm. And that would not necessarily be how we would see it. So how does this play into this idea? Like, the individual might be thinking, I'm doing the best that I possibly can, but my style is what's getting in the way. My ability to be a situational leader is getting in the way. I mean, speak to some of that in terms of the experiences you've had.
Yeah, well, what you've just brought up, I mean, I am very fond of saying, you need to be idealistic enough to know what you want, but sometimes is ruthless enough to get it done. Because organizations are, again, set up for conflict, scarce resources. To your point here, Dean, I think we do need to think about where we're going and what we're trying to achieve. A lot of leadership is about getting results and what is situationally called for. Again, we have a lot of individuals who are more there for their own self-aggrandizement, to line their own pockets. There's a lot of times where what's good for the organization may not be good for a certain individual, and vice versa. But this is why it really behooves people to think about, these are an additional set of skills. This is not to say you are changing your DNA or who you are, but you need to develop these skills really if you want to operate at that mid and higher level to get things done.
And what are those skills?
Those skills, which I'm laying out in the book, but thinking about influence, right? How you influence other people. I call it political skills, okay? And there's a lot of research on here. We don't need to go into that. The whole part around social capital and networking. You are working through other people. So a lot of times you do not get to choose who you work with in some of these organizations. You will be set up for conflict. Let's just take the typical sales and marketing, right? You have kind of the end goal that's in common, but your incentives, compensation may be totally misaligned, short and long term, right? This is very classic. Then to think about, you are communicating, right? So how are you going to marshal other people, right? Particularly through the entire ranks, even in times when they may not believe, right? You go through a rocky road, right? You as a leader do still need to engender confidence, right? That we can get through this. And so those are sets, I think, were pretty universal around leadership. And if we do look at this, a lot of those leaders who do rise up, who are doing some of these things that line their own pockets, they're very skilled in this. They're very skilled in this. And if you actually, have a section we talk about studying con artists, right? Anything taken too far to the extreme, right? I build a very good relationship with you. I have a certain image, social proof around what I do that causes you to invest or to appoint me to a certain position. We see lots of leaders get selected. A lot of politicians get selected in this way. May have no bearing on their actual skills or what they actually will do, but yet they're being selected, right? Or they're having power and influence to get things done. So good people do need to understand these skills and how they might use them towards whatever the desired end goal may be.
You mentioned, I think it was something I read, or maybe it was an excerpt from your book about the fact, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, that we have a kind of currency right now in leadership around authenticity and vulnerability. We think about Simon Sinek and his work, The Golden Circle, that he made so famous there when he started that TED Talk several years ago up in Seattle. That explaining what my why is, and that people follow you based on what you believe versus what you do, So it's this authenticness that comes into leadership, where you got Brene Brown talks a lot about vulnerability. It's like we need to be able to not be the person who appears to be perfect, that we can share our personal lives. We can open up to our teams, and all of a sudden that creates a sense of psychological safety with the people that we work with, because they see our leaders exhibiting that human characteristic of vulnerability. Your point of view, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, is that there's some part that's missing, that vulnerability and authenticity is important, but it's not the full meal. What is missing in those two different constructs around how we value leaders that we need to be paying attention to?
Well, part of this is how we define authenticity, okay, and vulnerability. And I think the very incredible thought leaders and speakers that you've just mentioned, however, I think, the concepts have been watered down. They tend to mean everything. And people will say, my authentic self is showing up and saying what's on my mind. But really, what is your authentic self? We are constantly evolving, changing, depending what the situation may be, to get things done. And that doesn't mean your values are changing, but authenticity, I find, and there is evidence here too, that taken too far, right, it causes us to become very fixed, rigid in terms of what we will or won't do. And as we know from growth, we're continually growing. And a lot of that means kind of experimenting outside of your comfort zone to develop new behaviors. Some of the behaviors that we've kind of talked about before, right? I feel networking's icky. I need to do this and build a relationship with someone. And these two concepts, I would say, for example, trust. You mentioned safe spaces. Trust is essential, right? If you want a high-performing organization, you want trust within that team where people can speak up. The problem is, if you haven't kind of built that culture, not everyone is on the same page, right, in terms of their ethics. And they will take advantage, right? If you're sharing some information, they may then later use that to their own advantage against you, kind of talking behind closed doors about you or misappropriating what you're saying. And so I think we just need to adjust this. Great concepts, authenticity, vulnerability, but to be careful, right, when we use them, understand what the landscape and context is. But I'd say, for example, trust but verify. Take steps, right, until you understand what you're looking at. I've seen this is how a lot of people get derailed in organizations, because they just trust blindly. They just share things vulnerable, that make them potentially look weak, maybe out of context, maybe too much information that don't serve them or gets used against them later on.
Well, isn't that kind of like reading the tea leaves? If you were really, of course, you have your own emotional intelligence of understanding your reactions, hopefully learning from them, and understand your emotional state and be able to, put it in check when needed or pull it out when needed. Mm-hmm. But it's also about this idea that I got to pay attention to the other person. I got to pay attention to the team, or the company, or whatever the other is. And based on that, reading, I'm going out and doing reconnaissance. What's going on there in the field? Like, what's happening?
Exactly.
What is the mood here? Do I have the ability to do both? Can I self-manage and manage what I'm sensing is going on with other people, and somehow find a way to bring those two together?
Yeah. So the sensing, I know you talk a lot about intuition. You need to listen to that. And there is a strong part here around empathy, perspective taking. Again, you're working with other people, and so you need to know where they're coming from, their point of view, their hot buttons, what's lined up in terms of their goals. Because, the number one way you often get your things done is helping someone else with theirs.
Yeah.
So that idea, right, again, we live in an interconnected organization, so we need to really be in tune with that. So that's also self-awareness, too, of how we may be. Like, to your point, right, our intent may be this, but the impact may be different because of the way that was perceived. So very important to be in tune with that.
Tell me if I'm right. Your book has a model. It's a 3-part power framework. I think it's the rock, the map, and the snowball.
Correct.
Okay, so that's different. Congratulations for catching my attention. You're not using words that we hear all the time. Empowerment, engagement, whatever, those things that seems to water down over so much use. Yeah. What is the rock, the map, and the snowball?
Yeah, so very briefly, the rock is about getting real, okay? The map is about getting strategic, and the snowball is getting doing. And in particular, with topics like power, like politics, which we've talked about here in the first half,
Yeah.
Get real is understand how the system is operating. Okay. That doesn't mean you can't change it, but if you want to go and do an intervention, you ought to understand how that system works if you seek to change it. Get strategic is to see the whole forest and to see the map, okay, of where things are. So you can see how the pieces fit together, where there may be shortcuts, where there may be bogs that are going to slow you down. And get doing is, to this point, if you talked around where those who may be fixated on authenticity may become very rigid, is think about experimentation or how you may shift up in certain situations where that will help you move forward and perhaps develop new skills and behaviors that are going to continue to serve you, particularly as you rise or do things as a leader.
And that's the snowball.
That's the snowball. So
got it. All right. I'm going to pull back here for a second.
Yeah.
I want to go philosophical here, if we can kind of go 30,000 foot. So let me just set this up by saying a couple of weeks ago, I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I was actually working for a company whose current headquarters used to be where my father worked. My father worked for the Minneapolis Star Tribune for 35 years as a reporter. And they tore down that building and the new building was put in there. And now I'm working in that building with a client. It's like, whoa, wow, that's weird. Mm-hmm. It's cool. So I'm looking out the window. This is just recently. Looking out the window and I see this bar. And the bar is called the Press Box. And it's completely boarded up. It hasn't probably served a Manhattan or a gin fizz for years, right? But it's still got the sign up there. And I'm going like, oh yeah, my dad used to hang out there. Right? He used to go there and hang out with his buddies and the other photographers and the editors and so forth. And they would sort of process the day, maybe over a cocktail or whatever. And it was like back in those days, work wasn't about personal transformation. Work wasn't about being vulnerable or authentic or even influence to some degree. Maybe a little bit, but not to the degree it is now. And you kind of use the press box in my analogy as a way to sort of like unpack kind of informal coaching back and forth, even though we didn't call it that back in those days. And now we have this conversation and other conversations that are all about self-fulfillment and reaching your purpose and all the things that are now so much a part of the organization. We're now seeing that leadership is not just about getting stuff done. It's about developing people. It's about getting them connected to what makes them tick, right? So I'm not disputing that that's not a great thing. I think that leadership and our style of leadership sort of mirrors the values and the norms of our society at the time. So now we're going through another shift. So here's my question. How's that for a lead up? Big disruptor obviously is AI. And we're still on the back end of COVID. A lot of people are still working from home. We got a lot of loneliness out there. We got AI coming in and taking root in our backyard and becoming extremely important and valuable in many ways. But it's going to change leadership, just like other cycles have changed to be able to match the environment. What is leadership going to look like in the future in an AI world?
Well, I want to hear.
How's that for a mouthful?
I want to hear what you got to say here as well, Dean. But I think this, if we even go up a slightly higher level, right, which is AI as a tool. And so it can be utilized in many different ways. I think this is what is going on right now. There is a struggle for how are we going to use it. Certain individuals would use it in certain ways for certain means. And if you look at any kind of technology, right, this I think is the question. But to bring it down, I mean, I see an opportunity here for using it, integrating it into our leadership, so-called kind of hybrid leadership, where we've got the human side and we can integrate AI, because we've seen things that it can do remarkably well and point out things that humans aren't necessarily that great at. On the other hand, it can also go down rabbit holes and do things if we're not managing it correctly. Let's just take one example to bring that to life: bias, right? So AI could, if it's monitoring our conversation or a meeting we're holding, Dean, right? It could say, hey, you just listen to one guy and he's talking 90% of the time and he's the one who's getting promoted, right? This is classic, right? This happens in lots of organizations. He who talks the most and takes up the most airtime gets promoted. You might want to be aware of that, because you might not be aware of that as a leader. And now we can Zoom our calls, and great. On the other hand, right, the AI could be reading in, being kind of programmed from what it's pulled from, and hearing someone who says stuff that's very confident, boom, to the point, and saying, oh, that's the mark of a leader, versus someone who's maybe quieter. And so that could amplify potential bias or bad habits. So here we just see one example. I think there are many, and I'd love to have a deeper conversation about that.
Yeah.
How AI could be used to help us, make us aware of things, but it also can amplify some of our worst organizational problems.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that either, Michael. I've been thinking about it. In a way, AI is asking us to claim our humanity in a way that we were not needing to in the past. We got to become much more intentional about what are human experiences like. Vacations are basically being sold to have. Let's go have some human experience. Let's go interconnect with people. Almost like there's going to be more and more time for let's promote human experience, even though we're not calling it, because we may not have as much of it because our conversations are over Zoom or Riverside like we are now, or over cell phones or over texting, so it becomes a premium to be able to go and have a human experience versus an AI experience. And I don't know, maybe the younger generation won't value it the same way I do. I hear people say, well, do you care whether or not something is real or whether it's simulated? And they go, I don't care. It could be either one. I don't really have a problem. For me, maybe for you and others, we're kind of I put a higher premium on what is human versus non-human. I think we're going to have to continue to define that, and we're going to be much more intentional. And I think as we take away some of this rote work that truly does take extra time that we can give off to AI, maybe that pushes us more towards purpose-centered work, highly elevated work, strategic work, vision work, where the real value of human connection can actually flourish versus being bogged down into process and automation. Maybe it gives us a chance to be better people because we're taking away some of the mundane stuff. I don't have to go chop wood anymore, but I can go talk to my kid, over homework. That's the analogy.
Yeah. And I love that idea. And I think it's easy for us to sometimes get down on the generation, the screen-agers, right, that are coming forward. But I feel optimistic, and I'll give you one example from a client. All remote work, distributed team, and that company they crave, to your point, the human interaction. And how we used to have the offsite, they have the onsite. They meet once a quarter in a cool place, right? They've already saved all this money by not having a physical office. Right. They pick that spot. They have an experience, the human interaction, to talk about exactly the things that you point out there.
Right.
And again, AI can supplement and help with some of that. And hey, you guys have been talking about this. I've been monitoring all the conversations. Here are some themes that are coming up that you guys might want to discuss in person. So it can be, again, to this hybrid idea. I'm very bullish on technology. I am worried about the way things are proceeding. But to your point, I think this idea of the on-site and human connection is really important.
I just think it's a huge hunger still. I mean, I remember, you probably remember it too, right after COVID, there was a year and a half, we were locked down and all of our facilitations were online like this. And I remember our first meeting was down in Phoenix. It was this beautiful day down there, and we had this group of 60 people together for the first time in 2 years. It was a barn burner. I mean, it was a love fest. It was like Woodstock. I mean, everybody just had such a great time. I don't mean this in a bad way, in a really positive way, because we were so thirsty for it. And I still feel there's a huge thirst for it. I think people are scared. They have the thirst, and yet it's sort of like some people are kind of like that deer you have to kind of slowly come up to, because we're a little bit less familiar with each other. We're a little bit less trusting of each other, partly because we haven't had enough time with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that then translates into all sorts of other downstream issues when we don't have trust. But I do think that I agree with you. I think there's a huge value in promoting the face-to-face meeting and bringing people together. And leaders, like the people that you work with, are going to have to balance both worlds, the interpersonal, high-touch world of the face-to-face. At the same time, we also have to manage the meeting, which is over these little boxes, and have to do both. That's a new world.
Yeah, and I would say to your point, and it's what we do as coaches, right? Helping people kind of reframe and think about things in different ways and experimenting. And let's take the flip side of this, right? When you mentioned COVID and lockdowns, that opened us up to kind of a new muscle, right? Depending, you could be scared about it, but you could also embrace it and say, okay, I now can deliver in this way. What could this medium teach me? Mm-hmm. Or what might we do differently or more efficiently from this medium, right? So all of a sudden we found ways to connect across the world. Hey, this is great. You can watch the video first, right? Flipping the classroom, all sorts of different skills, including the introverts kind of got a chance to speak up more, be seen on camera versus they were invisible, right, in the room because they were so quiet.
So long as they have their cameras on.
Got to have your camera on, exactly.
Yeah, that's a problem too.
Of new constraints, new opportunities. And I think AI, if we look at it and embrace it in that way, it creates the ability to just learn and develop new muscles. Again, where do we want it to go? What is kind of your end goal, which I know is a central theme in your show?
Well, Michael, tell me about your podcast. You've got one that's been going on. We've got 150 some odd episodes. What's that all about? What's it called? And it's sort of my segue into how do people continue to follow you after this conversation, in addition to the podcast?
Yeah. So my podcast, thanks for asking, Dean, is 97% effective. Advancing careers one hard truth at a time, which we've talked about here in the show. But the basic idea, right, is around some of these hard truths around what advances our careers, makes us more effective, particularly some of these that we either don't believe. There's a lot out there that's parroted around in the leadership industry that's not based on evidence, feel good or anecdotal. And so the reason for the podcast is to bring on a lot of diverse voices, coaches, academics who have done research that often doesn't see the light of day. So they need to break it down in kind of practical applications, as well as individuals and how they've gone through the process, this transformation of rethinking, reframing some of these skills and how they've used it for good. Because what I find is people out there need to hear it in different ways. And that may connect, right, when a certain individual is talking about their situation. And we're coaches, right? So it's about bringing the whole person and tapping into people's richness and resources, not us just sitting and lecturing. In fact, that's very little of what we do.
Totally.
Yeah.
So finish this off with one hard truth.
One hard truth is that your smarts and hard work are not what propel you up into those more senior levels.
Great. Now I have to ask the follow-up question. If my smarts and my hard work, which is part of the American fabric of what we value, go get smart, go work your ass off, you will do well. If that's not the secret sauce, or that's not the whole recipe in my secret sauce, what is? What's missing?
Think about that extra dimension of influence and working with other people. The combination of smarts and hard work, plus the influence and working with others, that's what propels you.
So that's the holy grail. That's the missing piece. Not the holy grail, but it's the missing piece.
Yeah.
It's great. Well, Michael, it's really been nice to talk to you. It's you feel like you're right here. You're right here in my own office, right?
But you're always here. You are right here. This is the beauty part of it.
Let's get into string theory now, okay? We're living in parallel universes, but no, you're down in Spain. Which part of Spain are you in?
I am outside Madrid.
So how's the weather down there? We're going to southern France coming up here, and I keep seeing all these weather reports of a lot of fires in northern Spain that has just been tough. What's going on?
It is a barn burner. It is hot this summer, Southern Europe. So, but I know you guys are based, at least the company's based down in Phoenix. So
we're kind of used to 110.
But the beauty is Spain is a fantastic country. My wife doesn't want me to say that because she says, well, more Americans will come. But the northern part of the country is beautiful. I know you spend time up in Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest. Very similar in northern Spain. Fantastic. You mountain climb as well. So the Basque Country.
Yeah. Well, it's like as soon as we start, my wife and I do one big trip a year. This year's southern France. Last year was Italy. The year before that was the Cotswolds in England. And, so we try to do one big trip, 3 weeks. And we keep thinking like, yeah, we got to get to Spain. And I think maybe next year is going to be the year. Maybe at a time that's not as hot. Maybe we'll go in like late October or something.
Yeah.
Early November. So we don't have to repeat our experience of Phoenix all the time. But, it's amazing. You find places when it's in that kind of environment to say first thing on your list that's important is it a good bed and is it air conditioning? And the rest of it is like, okay, we can deal with that. Well, Michael, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Dean, from having listened to your podcast and knowing, about you as well, I would also suggest, as well as to listeners out there, to consider walking part of the Camino Santiago, which is what was historically a pilgrimage that goes across the entire country. Parts of it start in France and other parts of Europe. Fantastic way to disconnect, to think about your higher purpose, and get some great exercise, have great food for a reasonable price.
That sounds great. Well, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, Dean, thank you. Fantastic.
Thank you for listening to Leadervation with Dean Newland. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com, or check the show notes. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. Transform your leadership success with Leadervation.